Welcome to Buckets. This is Action Network's daily basketball betting podcast. I'm Maria Marino, host of Green Dot Daily on Action Network, and I'm going to be bringing you weekly WNBA content. I have a special guest joining me, Action Network Director of Predictive Analytics, Sean Koerner. Now, Sean is an Action Network OG. He powers a lot of our projections here, particularly with regard to NFL. So you may know him from a variety of other sports. But Sean, you are also a passionate and longtime WNBA bettor. How did you first get into this sport?
Yeah, so I've, loved the WNBA, been betting on it for quite some time now. I would say it was right around the summer of 2007, I believe, when I started building, betting models, player projection models, just tapping in it. I was in college at the time, learning statistics, advanced statistics. So I wanted to tap into that and build some models. And, it's summertime, so you have NBA playoffs, baseball, which, I love both those sports, and WNBA. And I noticed that the WNBA market just wasn't that efficient. So, my projections were pretty far off from the market, and I was crushing it, winning like 70 to 80% of my bets. So I found it was a league that was fairly predictive. It just seemed like all the angles and factors I was identifying ended up panning out. So everything went my way. So that made WNBA even more fun to watch, just being able to win so much. But so I've just been following and betting on the WNBA for like over 15 years now.
Well, while you were busy doing that and becoming this, genius mastermind, summer of 07, that was the year I graduated high school. So, I was having a good time, but obviously a lot has transpired in 15 years. What kind of evolution have you seen both with the league and the betting market?
And real quick, summer of 2007, I wasn't just sitting in my room making projections all day. This one I wasn't at the beach partying. I just want to put that out there. But
Gotcha.
The betting market has evolved significantly over the past 15 years. I think it's got a lot sharper, but I still think there's a pretty big edge here if you follow it closely. I think Jim on the last podcast was, hammering that point home, and I couldn't agree more with that. But just when it comes to data, the official WNBA site is incredible. They have a lot of data there. It's getting even better. I guess they're revamping it for this year. So just having more data has made it a lot easier to make projections for it as well.
You mentioned Jim, and just for anyone who might not know, Jim Turvey has written extensive previews on every WNBA team. So you should definitely look for those on the Action Network website and app to help you get ready for the season. And I'm curious too, just for this season in particular, because it's kind of unprecedented in terms of the amount of attention that it's gotten, the storylines in the offseason. Is there anything that you're really looking forward to?
I mean, everything. I'm just excited for the season to start. But we do have two super teams, and I think the Liberty are going to be as good as advertised. Like I said, this is a pretty pure league, pretty predictive. So I don't think it's going to fall apart and they're going to be a 500 team. I think they're going to be really, really good. Brianna Stewart and Jonquel Jones are two of the most valuable players in my model. So the fact that they added them, they already have Sabrina, who's becoming a superstar. I just don't see how this fails. And then, of course, we have the Aces. So both teams are going to be really good. And then it's kind of wide open after that. But also, Brittany Griner returning is a great story. That's going to be another thing to watch. So just, every game, I'm just looking forward to seeing every team play their first game and start, crunching some numbers here.
So is that why you're wearing the Mercury hat this time?
Yes and no. This has to do with my favorite bet of all time a bit later on. But it doesn't hurt that, this is also the team that Brittany Griner's on.
Okay, I like that as a tease. We will get your favorite bet of all time later in the show, but you mentioned your model. So I would like to get into that to help folks who might be new to betting the WNBA. Can you sort of give us an insider look at how you create your model and just your process for betting throughout the season?
Yeah, so overall, what I'm doing is creating spreads and totals for each game. before the odds come out. So, by doing that, I do that with really every sport, but by doing that, it just really,
That's why you're called the odds maker.
I
Just
guess you
say,
could say
just
that.
say.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. And I do that with everything outside of sports too. I have to make projections for everything, but doing that it really forces you to consider every angle, every factor, where you think the market will be. And I do this based on, my updated power ratings for spreads and totals. But so once the line does come out, I see where I might be different, and I try to figure out why I'm different than the market. And the assumption isn't always I'm right and the market is wrong. That's just a bad mindset to have. So if I'm different than the market, I just try to pinpoint why that might be. And then if I think I'm right and the market is wrong, that's when I lock in a bet. And for every bet, I'm going to write a blurb as to why that is. And there's just a bunch of different reasons. And we can go over some of those, but I don't have like a foolproof system before every season. Like I'm just going to bet a team on the second leg of a back-to-back, things like that. I don't follow that. Again, it's just every matchup is unique, and I'm just trying to project the spread in total for each game.
Now, will you do sort of a preliminary or preseason power rating for each team, or are you just going to sort of wait until the first few games are played?
Yeah, so of course I'm going into the season with initial power ratings, but I think nobody really has a good sense. We kind of do need to see some games to see, how teams are. One of the things I'll look at, or I'll try to, have a factor early on the season, is some of these players are coming from overseas, so they might not have chemistry with the team, or there might be various injuries where the team might be a little shorthanded. So I'm just looking at things like that early on. But I do try to just get my feet wet just slowly. Opening night, you're not going to see me post 15 bets. So I'm a little bit more cautious until, like I said, we're going to see a couple games from each team, start getting data. But everybody's on the same page, right? Nobody really knows how good each team is. So I will have some bets. But I do get a little bit more comfortable once we do have a few games under our belt.
I think that's a great strategy in general. Of course, we will be having an episode of Buckets with opening night best bets Thursday. But that being said, in general, there's been so much roster shakeup throughout the season, and final rosters aren't even due until the evening before opening night, which is this Friday. So I definitely like that strategy. And what are some of the reasons, you kind of alluded to this, just the reasons why you might find that your projections might be slightly different than the market, and that could create a reason for you to bet one way or the other?
Yeah, so one of the first reasons is just a key player being in, out, or questionable. Like I had mentioned earlier, I kind of have power ratings for every player. There's a handful of players that are worth, over 3 points, some worth maybe 5, 6 points, like Brianna Stewart. I mean, she could be worth 6 to 7 points. On the Liberty, however, I don't think she's that valuable because they're so deep now. They have Jonquel Jones. So that for every player, I have a player rating. And the market doesn't really adjust to these as much as, NBA, NFL. So there was a game last year where Candace Parker was just like scratch out of nowhere. And she's not as valuable in this point in her career, but she's still worth 2 to 3 points. So that's a massive edge, being able to bet on the market, knowing Candace Parker is out and the market hasn't moved yet. So that's a really good way to find value. The other is just looking at the nuances of travel and the schedule. And an example, like coming up, looking at the Mystics schedule, their second and third games of the season are against the Sun. The first game's in Connecticut, second game's at home in Washington. And that second game, they're going to have a lower home court advantage just because both teams are going to be traveling back to Washington. So things like that, I'm going to lower the home court advantage a bit for that game. Same thing with the Mystics, their schedule in mid-June, they play at Seattle 2 games in a row. So for that second game, the Storm are going to have a slightly less home court advantage. So little things like that, just based on travel, I'm factoring in. I'm also looking where teams are at on a home or away stand. They could be the 7th game in a row on the road, and I'm going to lower their power rating quite a bit as a result. So sometimes you could find value on that. But one of the, sneaky reasons why I find value is I'm, crunching numbers and looking at the data for each game. So I look for games that have misleading results. You can have a game where both teams shoot lights out, but the pace is actually a little bit slower than anticipated. So maybe the next game, both teams, there might be value on the under on the total or things like that. So I'm taking each game, looking at the data and try to estimating what I think the score should have been. And sometimes doing that, you can get value on the very next game.
I'm glad you brought up sort of the nuances. It's not so easy in the WNBA as being, home or away. You have to look at sort of the surrounding travel schedule. As we know, most of the time, WNBA players are not flying charter. They are flying commercial. And I'm glad that you brought up the Connecticut Sun too, because I don't know if you've ever been to Uncasville, Connecticut, but it's not very easy to get to. And it's like a place where like you can't just fly there. Like you got to like fly and then you got to get on a bus and it's just like a total pain. So definitely something to keep in mind for Connecticut. And I think too, when you're looking at this, like the misleading sort of results that could be factoring into a game, that could also sort of lend itself to trap games, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the best reasons, or one of the likely reasons you're gonna have a trap game. Just the market's gonna be overreacting to something that recently happened. So there's a lot of examples of that. And one of the reasons also is, just the strength of schedule of a team's recent games. There was a point last year, I think it was the Liberty, they faced like the Aces twice. The Storm, who had Brianna Stewart at the time, was a top 4 team arguably.
Yeah.
And everybody was all over the Sky playing the Liberty, but they had a brutal recent stretch in the schedule. So I think the market power rating for them maybe drifted a little bit farther away than it should have been. So I caught that. That was one of my favorite bets last year. But
and by the way, I was at that game.
Oh,
I was at
right.
that game. Just saying. And I remember to myself thinking, maybe the Liberty have a chance here to take advantage. Like you said, they had sort of a stretch where they were playing poorly, but they were playing very good teams. And meanwhile, the Sky, I remember reading that morning, had travel issues getting into New York and maybe weren't as rested. And so that was a great spot for you to hammer the Liberty. Were there any other bets from last year that you remember, that you recall fondly?
Well, I don't remember what game it was, but there was a game where I had like the under, and both teams were just shooting lights out. Like both teams were 80% beyond the arc after the first 6 minutes. So I was mad about that. So I had to double down on the under. And then they kept shooting lights out, and I tripled down on the under. And then it all just collapsed. And the game had like a 5-minute stretch with no points. And ended up hitting all 3 of my bets. At first, I thought I was just trying to buy out a little bit and just try to get something back, but I ended up winning all 3 bets. So it's one of those things where you just have to trust your initial read on the game. And if things get haywire, live betting just creates a great opportunity to keep hammering, my original stance.
Well, we're going to get into just a few more general tips in a second, but I thought of one thing with regard to, team chemistry narrative. And I feel like there was something going on with the Mercury last year. And is this the favorite bet that you were referring to?
Oh,
or is this something else?
Possibly. No, that was a different favorite bet. My favorite bet was from 2021. But okay. Last year, yeah, it was Skylar Diggins-Smith got into it with Diana Taurasi on the bench. Right. They had to be separated. And sometimes things like that can bring the team together. But if you look, they were up by like 10 points and they ended up losing by 10. I think they went like -20 after that fight. So it was a situation that wasn't great. And then Skylar doubled down on it on Twitter after the game, and they played the very next day. So I faded them. My numbers also backed it up a little bit. I'm never going to just go off something like that, but my numbers were suggesting to fade them anyway. And I just thought the team chemistry was going to be off a bit. Maybe something like that in a couple weeks it gets resolved and they grow from it. But short term, I knew it was the time to fade them, and they just got annihilated the very next day. So yeah, I just love that angle on that specific bet.
As I continue to just tease your favorite bet of all time, we're still going to save it. We're
Yeah.
still not going to let you know what it is quite yet. But meanwhile, that was just an example of being aware of what's going on with the team, any team drama. And I think that just brings me to like your best practices for staying in the loop with these teams and really making sure you're informed.
Yeah, so just you really have to familiarize yourself with the teams, the players, their schedule. But I mean, the best way to really keep up with recent news, injuries is on Twitter. So I create a Twitter list with all the beat writers. I keep that updated so that we can get word, if a player's ruled out or not, because that's really how we get our edge for the first factor I mentioned. So you can look on my Twitter list, like you can follow my WNBA feed. And I'll keep that up to date for the season. But that's really the best way. And some of these, team handles are who break the news. Like the Seattle Storm when Brianna Stewart was out, like they were the one that posted that she was out. That it's kind of unique in that way. So that's the best way to get an edge is just be on Twitter, look for player news like that, especially if a player's questionable. If a player's questionable, I'll actually turn on the team handles notifications so I get like an alert on my phone whenever they tweet, just because I'm trying to get a really good bead on the market. So that's the best way to get ahead of player news like that.
I am definitely going to find your WNBA list and follow. I mean, there's a good chance I already follow a lot of the beat writers, and of course, following all the teams, that makes sense too, because as you said, they'll give you that player status. Now, you also talked about just utilizing the WNBA website for advanced stats. And the WNBA did announce earlier this week that they are, redesigning this website. So it should be a great user experience, and the app as well, which should be helpful. But do you have any like sort of just favorite stats or things that you like immediately look for?
Yeah, they just have so much great info there. Again, they have everything. You could do per 100 possessions, things like that. They have advanced stats. Like the player's offensive rating, defensive rating. So you can tell like when a player's out. If it's going to help boost the over, help boost the under, or how much value that player brings. This also lends to player props. They have a ton of data that I leverage in my player projections. So they just really have everything. They show you where teams like to shoot, how well they shoot from each range. So I kind of use that also when I'm looking at matchups. If a team is sort of a sieve at allowing points near the basket and they're playing a team that likes to attack the basket, I'm going to favor that team that likes to attack the basket even more, and vice versa. So they just have a wealth of data there. Check it out. And like you said, like it's being redesigned, it's going to get even better. So, just they have a ton of information there.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned player props, because this is something that we haven't necessarily gotten a chance to be able to bet much in the past. And I am curious to see what might open up from this possibility. So we'll definitely be following your info on that. But you do like DFS stuff too, and I have to say I've had a great time in the past doing daily fantasy hoops lineups for the WNBA. So we have a few tips that you have given. Anything I'm missing?
No, that basically covers it. And like I said, throughout the season, I'm really explaining why I'm betting on certain things.
Yeah.
So check those out so you can just get a feel of what I'm looking for. But again, it's just a case by case basis.
So we can become your proteges by,
exactly.
we'll follow your Twitter list. We'll follow your picks in the app, with which you accompany. You have like detailed descriptions, like paragraphs as to why it is, and then we can train and we can become just like Sean Koerner.
Exactly.
Okay. So now I feel like the suspense has lasted long enough. You're wearing the Mercury hat. What is like your favorite bet of all time on the W?
Yeah, so my favorite bet that I won was a couple years ago, June 1st of
Wow.
2021 to be exact. I had the Mercury plus 1.5 against the Sky. They were down 2 points with like 3 seconds left. I was basically ripping up my ticket at that point. But Kia Nurse took the ball, made like a pretty good juke, and just chucked it up half court and drained it.
Yes. Yes,
So
I remember
that
this.
that was that was an amazing. It was a bad beat if you had the Sky, but it was an
Yeah, yeah,
amazing
yeah.
win if you had the Mercury. So that was by far my favorite win of all time with WNBA.
I'm gonna mark my calendar for June 1st. We're gonna have an anniversary celebration. Maybe
Yeah.
we'll have you back on buckets. Before we let you go, Sean, I know you're not necessarily like doing a lot of futures, but is there anything that caught your eye? Any bets that you've put in thus far?
No, not yet. I'm waiting for opening day. I don't
Okay.
want to lock in any like. I love that they posted team win totals, but I don't
Yes.
want to pigeonhole myself and root for against or for a team all season.
Okay.
I kind of like to keep my options open, so I'm a one day at a time kind of guy when it
Yes.
comes to WNBA and everything else. But it
Yeah.
was cool to see the team win totals. Hopefully, we see more player props this season. But either way, I am extremely excited for opening night.
I like it. You go in with a nice clear head,
Yes.
open heart and mind. And I will say this, in case you missed it, the aforementioned Jim Turvey and myself did a WNBA preview episode of Buckets where we get into some of our favorite futures, our favorite win totals, all of that. So check that out if you missed. Once again, this is Buckets presented by FanDuel. Sean Koerner, it's been an absolute blast having you join me. I can't wait to follow along with you throughout this WNBA season. And by the way, we'll be back with opening night
Yes.
best bets. Once again, dropping Thursday, her hoop stats analyst, Dano Mataya, will be joining me. Sean, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. And yeah, can't wait for us to finally have some games to talk about.
If you haven't already, make sure you download the award-winning Action app. That's where you can follow Sean Koerner, maybe even myself. Maybe I'll even start tracking some bets before we know it. And rate and review this podcast if you get a chance, preferably with 5 stars, and you could win some Action swag or a free subscription to Action Pro. Let's get buckets.